A Roman werewolf story. Well, it feels kind of apt with Halloween on the horizon. So yeah, there was a famous story about a werewolf, and it dates to around the middle of the 1st century AD, and it comes from Satyricon, which is a sort of novel that was written by Petronius, and it's got some familiar elements to it. So what I'll do is I'll give you a brief outline of the story, and then comment on some of those elements. Our story is told by Niceros. He's telling it at a table when they're all having something to eat, and it refers to when he was a slave. And when he was a slave, his master had been away, and he had been, well, kind of getting romantically involved with a lady who ran an inn, which was quite a distance away from where he was living at the time. But as I said, his master was away, so he decided to make a nightly visit to her, let's call it that. But it was a bit dangerous, and he decided to take someone with him. And there was, in fact, an ex-soldier who was in the household at the same time. So the two of them decided to make a journey there. Kind of makes sense. And they're walking along, but they pause. They want a rest. And whilst they're having a bit of a rest, Niceros has a look round, and he's reading some of the tombstones on the side of the road, which were perfectly normal. That's not an unusual thing. But what was unusual was what his friend was doing, because he turns around and sees the ex-soldier take off all his clothes, make a circle of water around himself, and then turn into a wolf and dash off into the woods. Needless to say, and I think with fair reason, Niceros was completely spooked by this, and he was in a blind panic, and he dashed off and he ran more or less all the way to the house of his beloved. But when he got there, there had been drama as well, because apparently a wolf had got into the house or in the sort of property, and it had been worrying some of the sheep. But luckily, someone had managed to injure it in the neck, and the wolf had dashed away. So he spends the night, presumably enjoying himself, and in the next morning he makes his journey back. When he arrives back at his master's house, you guess it, he comes across the ex-soldier who's being treated for a wound in his neck. There are three things that I want to pick up on that story. The first is what's referred to sometimes as the sympathetic wound. That is to say, the wound a werewolf receives that also carries over to human form and can give them away. Now, in some narratives, in fact, in many narratives about werewolves, there's a sort of who is the werewolf? There's a mystery about it all. And even if you're watching the film, you know who the werewolf is, because ultimately they want to show you the werewolf being changed. Or perhaps they don't, but either way, other characters may not. And that's the whole mystery thing, it's the dramatic tension. And sometimes that can be a red herring, because the werewolf got hurt on the arm, and then you see a guy, his bandaged arm the next day, and they're like, must be him. But he's saying he injured it doing some gardening. You don't know. Now, on the change itself, he changes into a full wolf. It's not half man, half wolf. And again, this might be one of those many things that we actually credit to the invention of cinema, or rather the werewolf being depicted in cinema. That's actually the reason for a lot of what we think of as canon stuff about werewolves. It's just easier to have a human than an animal depicting a horror creature. And it can do much more. It can jump through windows, can open doors, it can do that, all that kind of thing. And the last point I want to make is the full moon. So we do have a reference to the full moon in this story, and I left it out because I thought perhaps you might think of it as being the trigger. The full moon is mentioned in the account, but it's only mentioned because it's a practical thing, because otherwise how does Niceros see the change, and how is he reading all of those tombstones? So it's a practical thing. It isn't the trigger. And again, the trigger of the moon, or rather the moon being a trigger for the werewolf change, is more a cinema thing. I mean, how many times do you see that cut in a werewolf film where it goes to the moon that's been partially covered by the cloud? You know what it is. It's that dramatic timer. It's the Jaws music. It sets the tension up. So again, it wasn't really anything to do with werewolves in antiquity. You don't really see the moon as a thing. And in fact, when you think about it, the ex-soldier is actually transformed on his own volition. There's no other reason for him transforming other than he seems to want to be able to do it. Anyway, I hope that all made sense, and if you've got any questions, stick them in the comments.